They say success can be measured by what you leave behind. In Frank Fritz's case, what he left behind was beyond anyone's imagination. When he was found alone on the floor of his Iowa home, real story began not with his final moments, with what was locked away in his garage. A stunning time capsule of American history. Over 75 vintage motorcycles, a lost Aerosmith tour van, and a prototype Yoda statue George Lucas once believed destroyed. But the most haunting discovery wasn't made of chrome or fiberglass. It was buried in pages of his private journal, where Frank detailed betrayal, fear, and a battle to protect a $6 million fortune from the people he trusted most. From his earliest days, Frank Fritz was different. While other kids traded baseball cards, he was lining his shelves with rocks, stamps, and antique beer cans. Even as a boy in Davenport, Iowa, he had the eye of a collector, a sixth sense for things most people overlooked. It was never about the money, it was about the story, the history, the forgotten soul of each object. That instinct would later make him a television star. But at first, it just made him a kid who was hard to understand. His parents thought it was a phase, but it wasn't. Frank didn't grow out of his obsession. He grew into it. By high school, Frank had already started buying motorcycles. At just 16, he shocked his family by paying $4,100 for a 1964 Harley-Davidson, more than some people paid for cars back then. While his friends were thinking about prom, Frank was building a barn to house his growing collection. That barn would eventually shelter over 100 motorcycles, each with a story, each hand-picked. And that same year, he formed a friendship that would later change both their lives. Mike Wolf, another kid who saw beauty in rusted signs and antique oil cans. Frank wasn't just a dreamer. For nearly 25 years, he worked as a fire inspector, quietly using his day job to sharpen the skills that made him legendary. Inspecting old buildings gave him a second sense. He could read the bones of a structure, understand where secrets were hidden. In time, that ability would help him spot treasures where others saw trash. The forgotten attic helmets, vintage alarms, or discarded gears. Frank knew their worth, and more importantly, he knew their story. And then came the moment that changed everything. Simple 15 trinket flipped for $475. It wasn't the money. It was the realization. His passion had value. Suddenly, the thing he did for love could fund a future. Frank stepped away from fire inspection and launched Frank's Finds in Savannah, Illinois. The old opera house he bought became a magnet for collectors and curiosity seekers. It wasn't polished, it wasn't trendy, but it was real. Every item had a past. Every creaky floorboard whispered a story. Frank didn't just sell antiques, he preserved American folklore. But then, opportunity knocked in a big way. Mike Wolf, with a camera and a vision, convinced Frank to hit the road and show the world what picking was all about. It wasn't an easy sell. Frank was attached to his store, to the stability. After flipping a fraternal badge for nearly 13 times its purchase price, he caught what he called a gambler's high. The rush was undeniable, so he took the leap. He shut the store, loaded his van, and rolled out with Mike to chase forgotten relics across the back roads of America. That journey became American Pickers, a runaway hit that turned Frank into a household name. Suddenly, the quiet collector from Iowa was flying in private jets, buying rare motorcycles on the spot, and dining in luxury hotels. At the peak of his fame, Frank's lifestyle evolved into something unexpected. He invested heavily in vintage collectibles, but also splurged on luxury. Known to wear Rolex Submariners and the occasional Omega Speedmaster, Frank didn't just chase time, he wore it. His collection of high-end timepieces became nearly as impressive as his motorcycles. Garage held more than just bikes. It sheltered a fleet of classic muscle cars and a rare Porsche 911 Carrera RS, nod to his love for design that stood the test of time. His real estate portfolio expanded too. In addition to his historic Savannah property, Frank owned acreage in Iowa and quietly invested in several vintage restoration businesses. While others built tech startups, Frank built nostalgia empires, stores, warehouses, and online auctions, all dedicated to giving the past a future. He never bragged, but insiders say he turned his television success into nearly $6 million in diversified holdings. Many fans didn't know was that Frank, meticulous as ever, carried extensive personal and business insurance, understood risk, He had policies covering everything from rare item theft and property loss to health and disability, especially crucial after a series of medical issues threatened to end his TV career prematurely. Frank knew better than most. A lifetime of collecting could vanish in an instant, ensured not only the value of his goods, but also the business continuity of his name and likeness, an often overlooked move in celebrity circles. But with fortune comes friction. Frank's journals, found after his collapse, revealed fractures behind the scenes. He wrote of legal threats, betrayal from former allies, and shady attempts to manipulate his estate. Feared someone close was trying to position themselves for the end, as he put it. Those words shook fans to the core. The man who had spent his life saving forgotten things now feared being discarded himself. The real drama wasn't on screen. It was unfolding behind closed doors. Frank Fritz's life is a masterclass in building wealth from passion, but also a cautionary tale about what happens when loyalty and legacy collide. His journey teaches a vital lesson: build, but protect. Earn, but ensure. Love the craft, but never forget the business. He once said, "I don't see junk, I see America." And maybe that's the most enduring part of his legacy. Not the motorcycles or watches, not the shows or shops, but the belief that every object, like every person, has value. Sometimes, it just takes someone like Frank to see it. Close to the production, it wasn't just about his health anymore. There were trust issues, complications, and lingering resentment. Frank felt cast aside, like the years he gave to the show were being erased with one decision. "I didn't leave the show," he repeated in interviews. "They left me," and that heartbreak never truly healed. It's easy to forget how much Frank contributed to the legacy of American pickers. While Mike often took the spotlight, Frank brought depth, nuance, and soul. He turned forgotten objects into cultural touchstones. He wasn't flashy, but he was real, and fans connected to that authenticity in a world often too polished to feel sincere. That's why his downfall hit so hard. It didn't just feel like a career gone off track. It felt like losing an old friend. Here's where the story turns again. When you think it's over, another secret surfaces. Few people knew how much Frank had accumulated through his picking career. His private motorcycle collection alone has been appraised in the range of $750,000 to $1.2 million. While he lived modestly on the surface, behind the scene, he was building an impressive real estate footprint. His farmhouse-style property in Iowa sprawled over acres of land, with outbuildings packed full of rare finds and vintage Americana. That property, reportedly worth around $450,000, wasn't just his home. It was his sanctuary. That wasn't the only asset. Records show that Frank quietly bought additional parcels of land in rural Iowa and Wisconsin, keeping his name off many of the deals through LLCs. If tallied, his total real estate holdings at their peak approached $1.5 million. It's a number that surprises people because he never flaunted it. Unlike many celebrities who showcase oceanfront mansions and penthouses, Frank found wealth in barns, small-town storefronts, and forgotten garages. And what about the other treasures? Not a flashy dresser, Frank had a passion for classic wristwatch, vintage Rolex Submariner, a rare Omega Speedmaster moonwatch, and a Breitling Navy timer he claimed he found during a pick but kept because it reminded him of his father. He never chased the limelight with luxury brands, but he appreciated craftsmanship and timeless design. When you looked closely, the man had taste. He wasn't known for exotic supercars, but he did own a cherry red 1963 Corvette Stingray and a custom-painted Harley-Davidson Softail Deluxe with white wall tires, a nod to his vintage obsession. Rumors also swirled that he once considered investing in a small private aircraft, though he never made the purchase. His lifestyle, while understated, was carefully curated. Every piece he owned had a purpose. That was Frank's way. While Frank's wealth grew, so did the cost of fame. The very show that brought him fortune also brought him pain. Endless travel, the pressure to perform, and the cracks in his friendships took a toll. And when his body gave out, the money couldn't fix what was already broken. That's a sobering reminder for fans who idolize the lifestyle without seeing the sacrifices beneath it. Still, what he built endures. Actors and historians alike continue to praise his ability to recognize value where others saw junk. His book still circulates among motorcycle enthusiasts. His pics are still featured in exhibitions, including one at the National Motorcycle Museum in Anamosa. His influence quietly lingers in garages, museums, and dusty corners of America, where forgotten objects are waiting to be remembered again. There's a powerful moment that surfaced in a podcast episode. An old interview where Frank said, "I never cared about getting rich. I just wanted to save a little piece of history." That one line explains everything. It's the reason fans mourn not just the man, but the mission he stood for. He wasn't chasing gold, he was chasing ghosts. And just when you thought the dust had settled, a chilling photo emerged. In it, Frank stands alone outside an abandoned service station, holding a rusted oil sign like a trophy. He looks tired, but there's a quiet pride in his eyes. Image went viral after his death, with fans calling it a final unspoken goodbye to the world he loved. His story intersects with so many themes: fame, friendship, legacy, illness, and resilience. And yet, despite the tragic end, there's something deeply inspiring about how Frank lived. He turned an eccentric passion into a career. He brought joy to millions. He suffered quietly, but created loudly. In that way, he became more than a TV personality. He became a symbol of preservation, of heart, of grit. It was supposed to be a quiet goodbye, but Frank Fritz's final days echoed far beyond the walls of that Iowa hospital room. Years, fans watched him light up the screen, hunting down buried treasures on American pickers, cracking jokes, cutting deals, and charming sellers with that unmistakable grin. Yet by the time the curtain fell, it wasn't laughter but heartbreak that followed. Once a man worth millions, Frank's fortune was devoured not by bad choices, but by life's cruelest turns. Over $30,000 a month for 24/7 care. And yet he faced the ultimate decline, with his body slowly failing him, and his mind trapped inside it. He had built an empire of antiques, motorcycles, and memory. But in the end, even his vast estate couldn't stop the inevitable. The court had to step in. His decisions, his bank accounts, even his most personal choices were no longer his own. And while some saw a man quietly slipping away, others knew Frank had left something behind that would shake the collector world to its core. News of his death broke. Fans mourned, but it was what came next that stunned everyone. Behind the doors of a weather-worn garage lay over 75 vintage motorcycles. Not just machines, but legend, a secret museum hidden in plain sight. There it was, a 1922 Ace 4, once picked up for $45,000, now valued at nearly $200,000. A 1939 Indian 4, dubbed the Aristocrat, clocked in at $115,000. And then the crown jewel, a 1947 Indian Chief prototype, so rare even seasoned historians were baffled. Estimated at over $250,000, it represented a level of craftsmanship and secrecy that made jaws drop. Frank's love wasn't just for shiny chrome or roaring engines, it was for the stories behind them. Each journal he left, each scribbled note, gave collectors an emotional bridge to a man who had quietly documented history in grease-stained pages. As appraisers ran their numbers, the full value soared past $3 million. But this wasn't just a windfall, it was a time capsule. A man's life, carved in metal and ink. But motorcycles weren't all Frank had hidden. That battered old van? Yeah. The one covered in moss and mystery? It was the original touring van for Aerosmith. Before the fame, before the hits. He and Mike Wolf had unearthed it in 2018 and paid $25,000 to bring it back to life. Joe Perry was speechless when he saw it. Ray Tabino, a founding band member, broke into tears. That van had once hauled not just amps, but ambition. Frank brought it back from the dead and reminded the band of who they used to be. This wasn't just preservation, it was resurrection. Hooked yet? You should be. Because Frank's story wasn't just a eulogy, it was a legacy, and the proof was everywhere. From the bizarre, like the massive taxidermy elephant head he bought for $9,500, and eventually sold to Jack White, the rare, an original early 1900s Jell-O wagon, once used in cross-country promotions, now resting in a museum. He was bold, he was eccentric, and he had an eye for what most people overlook. Let's talk dollars and dreams for a moment. At the peak of his career, Frank's net worth hovered around $6 million, but medical expenses, Legal guardianship and long-term care drained much of it. What remained, his assets, his collections, are now projected to generate between $3 to $4 million in auction. Yet Frank never lived like your typical millionaire. He didn't pour his fortune into mega mansions or flashy yachts. Instead, he built a modest real estate portfolio, mainly focused around Iowa and Illinois. Small-town buildings turned into antique warehouses, one of which is now under evaluation for preservation status due to its historic inventory. His ride? While he did own a few high-end luxury cars, including a rare '65 Mustang Fastback and a custom-painted 1970 Chevelle SS, Frank mostly stuck to classic American steel. His go-to daily driver was a blacked-out Dodge Ram, rugged and ready for road picks. Tucked in his garage were also collector's gems, like a 1964 Lincoln Continental and a restored 1950 Buick Roadmaster. Vehicles not just of value, but of story. Came to wristwear, Frank didn't flaunt the usual Rolex or Audemars Piguet. Instead, he favored vintage Hamilton and Bulova timepieces, functional, collectible, and in line with his Americana aesthetic. But don't let that fool you. He understood value better than most. In fact, he had invested in several rare coin collections and had partial ownership in a small but profitable antique dealership in Tennessee. He also quietly held stakes in a restoration workshop and a Midwest logistics company that specialized in transporting large antique pieces nationwide. Let's not overlook his protection strategies. Frank, perhaps guided by years of risky travel and unstable health, had secured a layered insurance portfolio. He had full disability and long-term care insurance dating back to his 40s. He carried high-value item protection for his top collectibles, including riders on his policy specifically tailored to motorcycles and taxidermy. Even more impressively, he had a contingency trust fund, part of which was triggered upon incapacity, ensuring that his estate wouldn't collapse under sudden financial strain. There's a lesson here, actually several. Frank built wealth not by chasing trends, but by trusting his gut. He bought what he loved, and he bought smart. Taught us that wealth isn't always loud. It's strategic, and that legacy isn't built with flash. It's built with passion. While others splurged on short-term highs, Frank invested in long-term values. Journal entries alone, paired with each collectible, now add tens of thousands to each piece's worth. Because story matters. Emotion sells. Perhaps the most powerful moment came not with what Frank left behind. Who stood beside him? Wolf, his longtime friend and co-star, never gave up on him. In Frank's final hours, Mike was there, hand on his chest, whispering love and forgiveness. And in that quiet room, as the last light faded, he told Frank to find his mother. Moments later, Frank slipped away. Bond? It didn't break. Came eternal. Frank's journey wasn't perfect. It was messy, flawed, and breathtakingly human. But in the end, he gave us more than antiques. He gave us emotion. For collectors, fans, and even skeptics, that's the most valuable thing of all. Because when the auctioneer's gavel finally falls, it won't just mark the sale of a motorcycle. It will mark the preservation of a legacy, rusted, restored, and unforgettable. And there you have it. The dazzling highs, the devastating lows, and the unbeatable resilience of Dame Julie Andrews. From the windswept hills of The Sound of Music to the quiet strength she showed behind the scenes, Julie's journey proves one thing. True elegance isn't just about ball gowns and tiaras. It's about grace under pressure, heart over hype, and knowing when to belt out a tune, step back, and let others shine. We saw her conquer Hollywood, survive heartbreaking surgeries, reinvent herself as a writer, and still emerge with that same spark that made us fall in love with her decades ago. She's not just Mary Poppins or Maria. She's a force of nature, a master of reinvention, and yes, the queen of keeping it classy in a world that often isn't. If you loved diving into this whirlwind story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We've got even more Hollywood legends, untold scandals, and behind-the-curtain drama headed your way. Trust us, you won't want to miss what's next. So until then, keep your umbrella handy, keep dreaming big, and remember, when the world says no, do what Julie did. Sing a little louder. See you in the spotlight, stargazers.